Hello and welcome, my name is William and today I wanted to share my impressions with you about this little rangefinder, the Revic BR4. Let's start with the price point. You can get it for $1,300 new on average. I got it second-hand, so I spent much less, but it is a higher price than, for example, you would pay for a Vortex 4000, which you can find for $700. So it weighs 10 ounces. This thing is IP67 water resistant. It is not made out of plastic. It is completely aluminium with a little bit of rubber here and there. It is Bluetooth compatible. You have to download Revic's app, which is called Revic Ops, which will enable you to set this thing up correctly. And it comes with this flap at the front, which I have to say saved me many times from some mud and dirt. When it comes to ergonomics, it is quite simple. You have here with the dents the focus ring, and outside of it you can adjust the eye distance to the ocular. You have 4 buttons here on the top. You have your main fire button, which enables you to measure the range. Have up and down and menu. So the battery compartment, you need to lift the flap here and unscrew it, which can prove a bit tricky if you're using gloves, and same for the smaller buttons at the top, the up and down buttons. It can be a bit tricky to figure out where they are with gloves, but it is possible. When it comes to the user interface, it is very responsive, but it can be a bit tricky to read because the display is LCD, liquid crystal display, as opposed to pixels like in SIG rangefinders. So that means that some of the letters are not shaped the way you would expect it, and well, you can figure out, you can guess what does it mean, but yeah, it's just a bit tricky to read. And to navigate all the different options, you absolutely have to read the user manual. One small weakness is that the Bluetooth can be a bit slow. It can be difficult to pair the rangefinder with your phone. I don't know exactly what's the reason, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I have to retry multiple times. When it comes to the brightness, it has 4 different levels of brightness. The maximum enable is very comfortable in broad daylight, but the lower brightness can be a bit bright if you're in completely dark conditions. And when it comes to setting up this rangefinder, you cannot do it if you, for example, you want to enter a ballistic profile. You cannot do it without the Bluetooth app, which fair enough, it would be very difficult to enter all the data through these little buttons, and one by one on the Bluetooth, you can just type the things. It has clear menus. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a weakness. It's just something to know. And the other problem, the reticle is off and not perfectly centered. And unlike other rangefinders like the SIG, you cannot adjust the position of your reticle to correct and for it to match where the laser beam is. Which means that if you want to measure something, you have to aim a little bit off. In my case, I have to be a bit like up and left because the beam is underneath and a little bit to the right. But a lot of rangefinders have the same issue. It's not perfectly matching. It's really annoying, but this is something you learn to live with it. It is a 10x magnification compared to other rangefinders, which usually have 7 or 8. And still we have still a reasonable field of view when you look through it. When it comes to the glass itself, I'm personally really happy with it. Whereas, for example, the SIG, they have this blue tint on their rangefinders. But of course, that's all subjective. I wanted to test exactly what is the resolution this glass can achieve. So I got to measure it with my US Air Force 1951 chart at 25 yards. And if you know the process, exactly how do I measure the resolution of optical instruments, I invite you to watch the very first video of this channel when I explain the whole process. So by eye, I achieve a divergence factor of 1.5, which is not great, but still decent. But through the camera, we got a divergence factor of 1.2, which is rather good. So it's not exceptional glass, but it does a decent job. Compared to other rangefinders, the beam divergence is quite interesting. It is 0.2 by 1.6 mils, and the reticle is small and accurate enough so you can aim at objects very, very far away. In my experience, I didn't have any problems aiming and ranging targets, steel targets, at 1000 yards. When it comes to the maximum range this thing can achieve, I think the longest distance I've been able to measure, that was on a big building, it was 4,374 yards. When it comes to trees, and I understand trees with leaves on it, So I was expecting something around 2,500 yards, but the furthest I've been able to range trees was 3,507 yards. But again, this is not something you can do it consistently. It's not because you're going to aim at some random trees, it's going to always tell you the distance. These are the kind of distances I get after a few tries, and specifically on conifers or pine trees, fir trees, so trees which are usually darker in color. When it comes to deers, when it comes to non-reflective targets, like deers for example, rangefinders in the similar category advertise usually maximum 2,000 yards. So I haven't been able to be in a spot where I could see animals that far, but in the winter, when trees lose their leaves, I consider them as non-reflective targets. I guess this is going to be very similar texture to deers and other animals, and the furthest I've been able to range trees in the winter without leaves was 1,800 yards. And these results, of course, may vary depending on the weather conditions and the target. To test the accuracy of my rangefinder, just for fun, I took some measurements at my local range, Beasley, whether it is paper targets, lane numbers, trees. So Beasley, which is a huge complex, is really amazing for doing this kind of measurements because so you can see the other shooting point of Chobham Ridge, which is up the hill almost 4,000 yards away. And vice versa, from Chobham Ridge, you are able to see Stickle Down and just for fun measure the distance from Chobham to the clock tower. And checking these with Google Earth, that was a perfect match. But it's not these tests for fun that are going to tell you like how accurate this is. To test the accuracy of my BR4, I brought it to Chobham Ridge, where you have targets. We have 20 targets at different distances. And all of these targets have been previously ranged with a Saffron Vector military grade rangefinder. And I also brought my rangefinder at different PRS matches to see how it fares compared to the actual measurements of the targets. So after ranging more than 20 targets, here are my charts. And to sum up the results, well, there are sometimes up to 15 yards difference between what my BR4 returns and the actual distance of the targets. But to be fair, that happened only in 2 occasions. So one target at 295 yards was measured at 279, and one target at 501 yards was ranged at 484. I was quite shocked, but it could be user error because on average, if I look at all the values, it usually has an error between like plus minus 5 yards, which is acceptable, I think. But as a shooter, this kind of error only matters if there is too big a difference when it comes to my point of impact. Because if it's a few yards off, but I am still able to dial in a correction which enables me to hit my target, I don't really mind. So in these cases, the difference in MOA was respectively half an MOA and 3/4 of an MOA compared to the actual impact point. So it's not ideal, but knowing that these targets were 3 MOA in apparent size, I don't think it would have affected my performance when it comes to achieving an impact on these. It could be user error because the Revic has different settings when it comes to ranging. It has, a long range setting, it has a closer target setting, further target setting, which means that enables you to select something which is in the foreground as opposed to the background. So for example, my rangefinder could have picked up, I don't know, the metallic structure holding the steel targets instead of the target itself. Or it could have measured the grass or a bush behind the target as opposed to the target itself. These modes are also useful if you try to range things in foggy conditions. I was able to range buildings 1,000 yards away very easily and consistently, even with heavy fog, which means that the buildings were by eye very difficult to discern in the fog. They were completely covered almost, but still the rangefinder returned the distance. One important feature of the BR4 is its ballistic calculator. To measure the accuracy of my BR4's ballistic solution, it's very simple. It is very similar. I went to Chobham Ridge where I know the exact distance of each target, and because I've shot there before and I was able to land bullets on the steel targets, I noted carefully what is the correction I needed to apply for each target. And to figure out what's the accuracy of my BR4, that's very simple. I would need to compare what is the ballistic calculator telling me and compare this to the correction I've applied for each target to get an impact. For these tests, I'm using factory ammunition, Cillian Bello 6.5 Creedmoor. And because the advertised velocity of your bullets on the box by the manufacturer rarely matches real life, so I recently chronoed a sample of 100 of them with my Garmin, so I know the exact speed of my bullets, the time they exit the muzzle, and also know the extreme spread and standard deviation. So what I did is I entered all the data I know in the ballistic calculator and asked it to return a correction for each distance. So here are the charts I've been able to build. And after comparing for more than 20 different targets, 20 different distances, I was really pleased to observe that my BR4 was able to be almost spot on most of the time, and with a difference with the actual point of impact around a quarter MOA on average. And again, in very, very rare cases, I have seen a half an MOA or 3/4 MOA. And to be fair, that's not very different from another ballistic solution I use, which is geoballistics, and which returns a very similar kind of difference or error, let's say. But nonetheless, even with these errors, these differences, every time I'm using either ballistic solution, I am able to land bullets on steel. So one thing is, if your BR4 ballistic solution doesn't match your real life ballistic trajectory, you can, with the app, you're able to do what's called truing, so you can adjust either the velocity of your bullets or the ballistic coefficient to make the trajectory, the calculated trajectory, match what you get in real life. So all in all, I have to say that I'm quite happy with my BR4, and this despite its weaknesses, which, to be honest, can be a bit annoying, but it doesn't prevent me from doing the job. I think the most notable is the difference between the reticle and the actual beam, the actual laser beam, which is a bit annoying when you try to aim things, but you get used to it. The glass could be better, the ballistic solution could be better, the interface could be better. They could, just like SIG, include a setting where you could adjust the actual position of the reticle. But apart from this, in terms of its performance, I think it's very decent. It does the job. It can be a bit expensive if you buy it from new, but if you buy it secondhand, I think it is something which is completely justified. It is completely reasonable. When it comes to range finding abilities, I think it is a very good rangefinder in the sense that it does what I ask it to do. But of course, that's very subjective, because I would like to compare this rangefinder with other rangefinders on the market, other ballistic solutions, just to see where it sits in terms of quality, in terms of performance. So whenever I have the budget, I may get my hands on these different rangefinders, but because this channel is not monetized, it's not sponsored, I pay with my own pocket, so it may take some time. And because I'm based in the UK, it's very difficult for me to access to US-made products. But if you are based in the UK and you, by chance, have one of these items you would like me to review, feel free to get in touch with me. I'd be very happy. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was useful, and as always, stay safe out there.